Okay, I'm going to use the whiteboards to help with examples for this lesson. So everyone's going to have to write these out by hand on a piece of lined paper. And again, if you miss something, just pause the video and then resume. So example 1, we want to factor 15x to the fourth minus 20x cubed minus 30x. So I really want to have my factoring chart in front of me, and I want to go through the thought process in the factoring chart. So step 1 is we common factor. So we want to ask ourselves, does the same number divide into each term? Well, the answer is yes, we can common factor here because I can divide each of these terms by 5x. So I'm going to factor out that 5x. And then I'm going to divide each of the terms by the 5x. To figure out what goes in the brackets. So 15x to the fourth divided by 5x would be 3x cubed. Negative 20x cubed divided by 5x is negative 4x squared. And then negative 30x divided by 5x gives me negative 6. It's always good when after we've common factored to quickly expand this out to make sure we've done this correctly. So 5x times 3x cubed is 15x to the fourth, right? If I put in that invisible 1 and add the exponents, I get the x to the fourth. 5x times negative 4x squared is negative 20x cubed, and then 5x times negative 6 is negative 30x, so it's correct. We do need to look here to see if we can factor again. It is a trinomial, however, the trinomial is not in the form of ax squared plus bx plus c. That's a cubed. So I'm not going to bother to try to factor this trinomial again. Okay, so that's example 1. Let's work on example 2. So in example 2, we want to factor x squared minus 7x plus 12. So my first step in my factoring chart is I look to common factor. I take a look at my 3 terms. I cannot common factor. So then I ask myself, how many terms are there? Are there 2 or are there 3? Well, there's 3 terms. It's a trinomial. Okay, so now I'm choosing between these 2 methods. Is A 1 or is it not 1? Here I can see that A is 1. So this is the quick and easy factoring method for factoring a trinomial. I'm using my chart. I'm looking for factors of C, which is 12, that add up to B, which is negative 7 in this question. Okay, so I might try 3 and 4. 3 plus 4 is positive 7, not negative 7. So then I might notice that negative 3 times negative 4 is also positive 12. And when I add these together, I do get the negative 7. So those are the numbers I want. So I'm going to put those in the R and S positions. So I know I'm going to have x's here. And then my first value is negative 3, and the second one's negative 4. Again, you can always expand this out, and when you expand it out, you will end up with the question. That's a way to double check. Okay, so now we're on example 3. This time we want to factor 242x squared minus 32. So, again, using the factoring chart, we want to see if we can common factor first. And we take a look at our question, and yes, we can. There are 2 even numbers, so I'm going to factor out a 2. So when I factor out the 2, I'm left with 121x squared minus 16. Then I take a look at what's left, and I ask myself, how many terms are there? Right? How many terms are there? 2 or 3? Well, there's 2 terms. It is a binomial. And then I check for the difference of squares. So, is the first term a perfect square? Yes. Is the second term a perfect square? Yes. And they're separated by a minus sign. So I know that that's going to factor into 2 brackets. I'm going to put a plus sign in the middle of one, a minus sign in the middle of the other, and I'm going to factor this difference of squares. So the square root of 121x squared is 11x, goes in the first spot, and the square root of the 16 is 4. Okay, so it's now factored and factored fully. The next example. Okay, I want you to pause the video and decide which factoring method you're going to use. We want to factor 5x squared minus 22x plus 8. Okay, in this question, once again, we always start by common factoring or considering common factoring. I do not have a common factor, so I'm going to move on. I have 3 terms, and A is not 1, so I'm going to use decomposition. So in order to use decomposition, I'm going to make my factor sum chart. So this time I'm looking for factors of A times C. So it's 5 times 8, which is 40. And those factors need to add up to negative 22. Okay, so what numbers multiply to 40 that might work here? Well, you could have tried 4 and 10. But when I add 4 and 10 together, I'm getting 14, so that's not what I'm looking for. How about 2 times 20? Now, I mentioned something like this to you before. The advantage of writing this down is by writing down 4 and 10, some of you might immediately think of 2 and 20 after, because if I divide 4 by 2, I get 2, and when I multiply the 10 by 2, I get 20. So that's another way to find other factors that might work. Now, 2 plus 20 is positive 22, but I need it to be negative 22. So let's add negatives in front of it. So negative 2 plus negative 20 is the negative 22. That's what I want here. So now what we want to do, I'll use 2 colors for this one for you, is we want to rewrite the 5x squared. And we're going to take our negative 2, negative 20, and we're going to use that to replace that bx term. So negative 2x minus 20x equals negative 22x. So I have not changed the value of anything. Okay, the next step for decomposition is we want to common factor twice. So I'm going to common factor with my first 2 terms. I can factor out an x. I'm left with 5x minus 2. And then I want to common factor with my next 2 terms. Remember, when this is a negative value, we always factor out a negative number. So I'm going to factor out a negative 4, and I'm left with 5x minus 2. This is important. We have to have the same thing in the brackets, otherwise we're not doing this properly. So if you can find combinations of numbers that work in your table, you have to get the exact same thing in the brackets. Okay, so take a look. Here's a term and here's a term. I'm going to common factor, so what's common in my 2 terms is the 5x minus 2. I'm going to factor it out. And what's left when I divide out the 5x minus 2 from both terms, when I pull this out and divide it out, I'm left with an x. And then over here I'm left with the negative 4. Okay, so that is now factored. It's written as a product. And our last example, example 5, we want to factor 3x squared minus 18x plus 27. Okay, so don't jump right in and use decomposition. You might be doing too much work for questions like this, and you may not get the correct answer at the end because you may have missed the common factoring, which would mean that maybe you might forget to factor it fully. So we start by common factoring. Can we common factor here? Does the same number divide into each of those terms? Absolutely. The number 3 goes into each of the terms. So we're going to factor out the 3. And we're left with x squared minus 6x plus 9. Okay, so now we take a look at what's in the brackets and we try to factor again. Sometimes we'll be able to factor again and sometimes we can't. So I have a trinomial where a is 1, so I'm going to use my quicker chart method. So we're looking for factors of c, which is 9. That adds up to b, which is negative 6. And try to think about the numbers that work. Remember to pause the video at any time and try to do the work on your own. And the numbers that do work are negative 3 and negative 3. Because negative 3 plus negative 3 is negative 6. So then I draw my 2 brackets. I know I'm going to have an x in this position because when I expand it out, it's the x times the x, which gives me the x squared. And then I write down my negative 3 and my negative 3, and it is factored fully. And that's the end of the examples for this. What you are going to do next is you're going to do a quick little quiz. Check the news items in the D2L for the quiz. And in that quiz, you're just going to identify which factoring methods to use, and then the practice work is not from the textbook, it will be the worksheet. Have a good day, everyone.